In the far reaches of the galaxy, the Zorvans once commanded an empire that stretched across multiple star systems. They were known for their advanced technology, fierce warriors, and powerful fleet. Their civilization was one of the greatest the galaxy had ever seen. But now, only a shadow of that once mighty empire remained. Their world was dying, and their species was on the brink of extinction. For years, the Zorvans had fought against invaders, internal strife, and environmental disasters. The final blow had come when a massive asteroid collided with their planet, shattering the surface and triggering widespread chaos. Cities were destroyed, the atmosphere was poisoned, and much of the population was wiped out. The few survivors were left to fend for themselves on a planet that was no longer habitable. The galaxy watched as the Zorvans' world crumbled, indifferent to their plight. Despite their past influence and power, the galaxy's various factions had no interest in offering help. To some, the Zorvans were no longer relevant. To others, they were a reminder of a time long gone. But most troubling of all, the galaxy's leaders saw no benefit in intervening. There were no riches to gain, no strategic advantage to be had, and no desire to help those they deemed weak. The Zorvans' last hope lay in a final, desperate act, a broadcast that would reach every corner of the galaxy. Their message would be simple, a final plea for aid. It was not just a cry for help. It was an acknowledgement of their near defeat, a surrender of pride in the face of their inevitable death. The broadcast went out across every major communication network, reaching billions of eyes and ears across the galaxy. It was a silent cry that echoed through the void of space. "We are dying," the message began, each word laden with the weight of despair. "Our world is gone. Our people are broken. We have fought and survived for so long, but we cannot hold on any longer. If there is anyone out there, anyone who can hear us, please help." The message was met with silence at first. In the distant halls of galactic councils and on the ships of various fleets, leaders exchanged nervous glances. Some shrugged it off, uninterested in the fate of a species that had once been mighty. Others, who had once been their enemies, saw no reason to offer any mercy. But amidst the indifference, something unexpected happened. The broadcast found its way to the United Earth Coalition, UEC, a collective of nations from Earth who had long remained isolated from the rest of the galaxy. Humanity had always been a distant player in galactic politics, more focused on their own survival than on the struggles of alien species. They had their own problems to deal with: poverty, climate change, and political unrest. Yet, humanity had always prided itself on its compassion. The Zorvans' plea stirred something deep within the hearts of humanity's leaders. The UEC had fought their own wars, faced their own near extinction during the rise of AI rebellions and nuclear wars. They knew what it meant to be at the edge of annihilation. For years, humanity had taken a step back from galactic affairs, unwilling to get involved in interstellar politics. But now, they were faced with a moral choice. Admiral Sarah Kincaid, a seasoned military leader, was the one who first proposed the idea. She was known for her pragmatism, but also for her deep sense of duty. It was she who suggested that humanity should respond to the Zorvans' call. She understood the consequences of such an act. There would be no turning back, and the galaxy would likely see their intervention as a threat. But Sarah believed in one simple truth: if no one else was willing to help, humanity had the strength to stand up for the helpless. "Let us be the ones to answer this cry," Admiral Kincaid said in a private meeting with UEC officials. "We have the power, we have the ships, we have the will to do what others are too afraid to attempt. We can save them even if the galaxy doesn't care." Her words struck a chord with the UEC leadership. In a decision that would forever change the course of galactic history, the UEC officially agreed to send a fleet to the Zorvan homeworld. This was not a diplomatic mission. This was not a mission of trade or conquest. This was a mission to save a species on the brink of extinction. The announcement was met with mixed reactions across Earth and beyond. Some cheered, believing that humanity was finally showing the galaxy the compassion it so desperately needed. Others, particularly those within the UEC's military ranks, were concerned about the repercussions. Sending a fleet to help a dying race could be seen as an act of aggression. The Zorvans had enemies, powerful ones, and their planet was a strategic target for many factions. The Erythians, an ancient and peaceful race, would not take kindly to humanity's interference. The Murtoki, a ruthless species with a reputation for destruction, had already begun their own assault on the Zorvans. In the depths of the UEC command center, Admiral Kincaid made her final preparations. Her fleet, the largest humanity had ever assembled, was set to depart. It consisted of battleships, carriers, and small stealth vessels, each one equipped with the most advanced technology humanity could muster. The mission would not be easy. They would face an uphill battle against enemies far stronger than they were. But Admiral Kincaid was resolute. "Humanity may not have the power of the old empires," she said as she addressed her crew. "But we have something they don't: determination, and we will show the galaxy that no one is beyond help, no one is beyond saving." As the UEC fleet prepared to depart, the people of Earth watched in awe. No longer would they be silent observers. No longer would they allow others to suffer. Humanity was choosing to intervene. The journey to the Zorvan system would take several weeks, and during that time, the galaxy continued its indifferent march. But for the first time in centuries, a spark of hope was kindling in the heart of one species: humanity. And as their fleet moved closer to the dying world of the Zorvans, they would come to learn something crucial. Sometimes, the decision to act, to save even one life, could change the course of an entire galaxy. This is part 1, and I've kept it exciting and emotionally engaging while adhering to your request for simple and clear English. The UEC fleet was ready. Ships of all sizes lined up in orbit above Earth, their sleek metallic bodies gleaming in the sunlight. The mission ahead was one that few had ever dared to undertake. Yet, as the countdown to departure began, Admiral Sarah Kincaid stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Resolute, a sense of calm determination in her eyes. She knew the risks. She understood the danger. And yet, she didn't flinch. For the first time in her career, she felt that she was part of something much greater than just a military operation. This wasn't about power, territory, or conquest. This was about saving a species on the brink of extinction, a species that, despite everything, still had the potential to rebuild. The orders were clear. The fleet would travel to the Zorvan homeworld, make contact with the remaining survivors, and assist in their evacuation. They would also defend the planet from any further attacks, especially from the Murtoki, who were already known for their brutality. No one knew how the galaxy's other factions would react to this mission, but humanity had made a choice. They would intervene, no matter the cost. The journey to the Zorvan system would take weeks. As the fleet made its way through the vastness of space, Admiral Kincaid spent her time going over the mission plan with her officers. She would need to prepare for every possible scenario. She would need to keep her crew sharp and ready for anything. "I want every crew member prepared for combat," she told her officers, her voice firm. "We don't know what we'll face when we arrive, but I expect each of you to keep your cool, no matter what happens. The Zorvans are counting on us." Her officers nodded in agreement, understanding the gravity of the mission. There was no turning back now. In the days that followed, the fleet moved in near silence, the hum of the engines the only sound that filled the massive ships. News of the mission had spread across Earth, and many had already begun to rally behind the UEC's decision. The people cheered for the brave men and women heading into the unknown. But there were others who questioned the wisdom of such a bold move. In the corridors of power, members of the UEC's council had raised their concerns. Some had feared that sending a fleet to aid the Zorvans would provoke a galactic war. The Erythians, known for their strict non-intervention policies, would likely oppose any efforts to meddle in the affairs of a dying species. The Murtoshi, a warlike race that had long held a grudge against the Zorvans, were already rumored to be planning a final assault on the planet. Admiral Kincaid knew that no matter how this played out, humanity would have to fight. But she also believed that this was a fight worth having. She couldn't just sit back and watch as another species was wiped out because no one cared enough to intervene. As the fleet neared the Zorvan system, the tension began to mount. The ships had entered an area of space that was heavily monitored by the Mertoki. Several scout ships were detected on the outer edges of the system, and Admiral Kincaid ordered her fleet to take up defensive positions. "We've made it this far," she said, standing tall on the bridge. "We're not turning back now." The crew remained quiet, their faces set with determination. They were ready. They had no choice but to be. At long last, the fleet arrived at the outskirts of the Zorvan system. The planet itself was barely recognizable. The once beautiful blue and green world had turned into a scarred wasteland. Massive cracks ran through the surface, smoke and ash rising from the ruins of what had once been a bustling metropolis. It was clear that the Zorvans had fought to the very end, but there was nothing left to save now. Admiral Kincaid could feel a lump form in her throat as she stared at the planet. Her heart ached for the Zorvans, for the people who had once held such power and prestige, now reduced to nothing more than survivors on a dying world. But she didn't have time to dwell on the sadness. The mission was clear. "Prepare to make contact with the Zorvan survivors," Kincaid ordered. "Let them know we're here to help." A team of UEC diplomats and translators was sent to establish communication. Moments later, a crackling voice echoed through the comm system. It was in Zorvan, but the UEC translators quickly decoded the message. "Who are you?" The voice was raspy, full of exhaustion and disbelief. "Why have you come?" "We no longer have the strength to fight." It was General Dirac, the leader of the Zorvan resistance. A proud, battle-hardened warrior, he had watched his people struggle for years. He had no trust left for anyone, least of all outsiders. "We are from Earth," Admiral Kincaid's voice came through the comms, steady and reassuring. "We've come to help you. We are here to evacuate you and provide protection from the Mertoki. Your people do not have to die alone." There was a long pause before Dirac responded. "And why should we trust you? You are human. Your kind has always been weak. We have fought alone for so long. Why would we trust you now?" Admiral Kincaid understood his skepticism. The Zorvans had been betrayed by many over the years, and they had no reason to believe that humanity would be any different. But she knew that her words had to be convincing. "We may not have your strength, General Dirac," she replied, her voice calm and sincere. "But we have something that the galaxy has forgotten: compassion. We have the strength to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. And we will not let your people fall while we can help." After a long pause, the comms crackled once more. "Very well," General Dirac's voice finally said with a grudging respect. "We will allow you to land, but be warned, we will not surrender. If you truly wish to help, you must stand with us in battle. Only then will we trust you." The transmission ended, and Admiral Kincaid gave the order to prepare for landing. The first step in this perilous journey was over, but the real challenge was about to begin. The Zorvans had survived against all odds, but they were broken, scarred, and unwilling to trust. Humanity would need to prove its worth, not just through words, but through action. This was no longer just a mission of mercy. It was a battle for survival. And for the Zorvans, it was a battle they would either win or die fighting. The UEC fleet moved toward the surface of the Zorvan world, ready to face whatever came next. The war was just beginning, and Admiral Kincaid knew that the path ahead would be filled with uncertainty. But there was one thing she was sure of: humanity's decision to intervene was the right one, and they would not back down. This part emphasizes the complexity of the mission and builds on the tension as humanity makes its presence known to the Zorvans. There's still a lot of uncertainty, but it sets the stage for the action and alliances that will follow. The UEC fleet descended through the smoke-filled skies of the Zorvan homeworld. The planet, once lush with forests and oceans, now resembled a battlefield. The cities were reduced to smoldering ruins. The land cracked open in places where the asteroid had struck. The planet's surface seemed to echo with the pain of a civilization on the brink of extinction. As the fleet approached, the Zorvan resistance fighters, those few who remained alive, gathered around the landing sites, wary of the humans. The air was thick with tension. The humans who had arrived to help were still strangers to the Zorvans. They had to prove themselves worthy of their trust, something neither side knew would be easy. Admiral Kincaid stood at the front of the command room, watching the live feed of the landing site. The Zorvans were standing watch, their weapons in hand, their faces unreadable. She knew that this would not be the peaceful start to the mission that they had hoped for. General Durac's words from earlier echoed in her mind. "If you wish to help, you must fight with us. Only then will we trust you." "Ready for landing, Admiral." Commander Lung, Kincaid's second-in-command, reported from across the room. "Let's get down there," Kincaid replied, her voice calm but firm. "We need to show them we're here to stay." Moments later, Kincaid stepped off the transport ship onto the cracked, dry soil of Zorva. The air was heavy with dust and the acrid scent of burning ruins. The sky above was a dull, reddish hue, thick with smoke. A few Zorvan warriors waited, nearby, their eyes cold and skeptical. "General Durac is expecting you," one of the Zorvan soldiers said, his voice deep and rough. Admiral Kincaid nodded, following the soldier through the desolate landscape. As she walked, she noticed the immense fortifications the Zorvans had erected, makeshift structures built in desperation to protect what remained of their cities. It was a stark reminder of how much they had suffered. Soon they arrived at a large, bunker-like structure. Inside, General Durac stood with several of his officers, his eyes scanning the UEC soldiers as they entered. He was a tall, imposing figure, his dark skin marked by battle scars and the weariness of years spent in a losing war. His gaze fixed on Kincaid as she stepped forward. "We are ready to fight," General Durac said, his voice low. "But make no mistake, Admiral. This is a war we may not win. The Mertoki are relentless and they will not stop until we are dead." "We know," Kincaid replied, meeting his eyes. "And we're here to make sure that doesn't happen. We'll fight alongside you. We'll defend your people. You're not alone anymore." Durac studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. "I hope your actions speak louder than your words, Admiral. The Zorvans do not trust easily. If you're truly here to help, show us." Kincaid nodded, understanding the challenge. The trust of the Zorvans would not come quickly, but she would earn it one step at a time. As the first wave of human soldiers prepared for deployment, the first signs of trouble appeared on the horizon. The Mertoki fleet, which had been lurking just outside the Zorvan system, made its move. Several large warships dropped out of hyperspace, their dark silhouettes looming ominously against the scarred landscape of the planet. "Admiral, we have incoming," one of the communications officers called out. "The Mertoki are moving in fast." Kincaid's heart raced, but she remained calm. "All ships get ready for combat. Engage at will. We're not backing down." The UEC fleet, already stationed in orbit above the planet, began to deploy their fighters. The ships moved swiftly, lining up in formation to intercept the incoming Mertoki ships. The enemy was known for their speed and firepower, but humanity's fleet had something the Mertoki didn't: the element of surprise. As the battle began, the sky above Zorva erupted into flashes of light as the two fleets collided. The UEC fighters darted through the sky, their sleek, agile frames outmaneuvering the larger Mertoki vessels. The Mertoki, in their heavy, imposing warships, launched devastating barrages of energy blasts, trying to overwhelm the smaller human ships. Kincaid watched the chaos unfold on the monitors, her pulse quickening with each passing second. She could see the human fleet taking hits, but they were holding their ground. The Zorvans, seeing the humans engage the Mertoki without hesitation, began to stir. The resistance fighters, armed with advanced Zorvan weapons, rushed to join the fight. They were ready to defend their homeworld, but they needed help, and they were now receiving it. On the ground, Kincaid and her team rushed to the front lines, meeting up with General Dirac and his warriors. The sounds of battle echoed in the distance as explosions rocked the land. The Zorvans had prepared for an assault like this, but even they were outmatched. "The Murtoki are relentless," Dirac muttered, scanning the horizon with a steady gaze. "They will not stop until they have wiped us out." "We'll make sure they don't get that far," Kincaid said, determination in her voice. "We need to take the fight to them." As the human and Zorvan forces prepared for an all-out ground assault, the Murtoki began to drop their own forces onto the planet's surface. The skies above darkened as enemy dropships descended, releasing heavily armed Murtoki troops onto the barren ground. "They're coming in," one of the Zorvans shouted. "We need to stop them before they get too close to the city." Kincaid gave a quick nod, signaling her troops to move out. The Zorvans and humans, united by a common enemy, charged toward the approaching Murtoki forces. The battle was fierce. The Murtoki soldiers, heavily armored and equipped with advanced weaponry, met the human and Zorvan fighters head-on. The air was thick with the sounds of gunfire, explosions, and the roar of combat. Kincaid moved with precision, leading her troops as they pushed back the Murtoki forces inch by inch. At one point, Kincaid found herself face-to-face with a Murtoki officer. The creature was massive, its body covered in thick black armor that seemed almost impenetrable. It raised a weapon, aiming directly at her, but before it could fire, a Zorvan warrior stepped in front of her, taking the brunt of the blast. The Zorvan fell, but not before delivering a fatal blow to the Murtoki officer, his weapon piercing the enemy's chest. Kincaid's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the scene unfold. The Zorvans were fierce fighters, but they had been pushed to their limits. It was up to humanity to ensure that this battle wasn't lost. The UEC fleet above continued to fight off the Murtoki warships, ensuring the skies remained clear for the ground forces below. With each passing minute, the tide of battle shifted. The humans working alongside the Zorvans were pushing the Murtoki back. The enemy's heavy armor and firepower were no match for the combined strength and agility of the two species. Finally, after hours of intense fighting, the Murtoki forces were forced to retreat. The ground was littered with debris, the smell of smoke hanging heavy in the air. But the Zorvans had survived another day, thanks to the unexpected allies who had chosen to fight for them. Admiral Kincaid stood amidst the aftermath, her breath steadying as the sounds of battle faded into silence. She looked over at General Dirac, who nodded in acknowledgement. There was no longer any doubt humanity had earned the Zorvans' trust, and together, they would fight for the future of the Zorvan people. This part brings the action to the forefront, showing humanity's first real test in battle. It also emphasizes the growing trust between the Zorvans and humans, while setting the stage for further challenges to come. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Murtoki had retreated, but it was only a temporary setback. The Zorvans had survived another attack, but their planet was still in ruins. Admiral Kincaid stood on the edge of the battlefield, watching as her troops worked alongside the Zorvan fighters to clear the wreckage. The air was thick with dust, and the ground beneath them trembled from the aftermath of the battle. Despite the victory, there was still tension in the air. The Zorvans, though grateful for the help, were not easily convinced that humans could truly be trusted. General Dirac, their leader, had made it clear. The Zorvans would fight their own battles, but if humanity wanted to help, they would need to prove themselves through action, not words. Admiral Kincaid had expected this. She understood that trust was not something that could be earned overnight. The Zorvans had been betrayed by many in the past, and they had every right to be skeptical. But she knew that the only way to earn their trust was to stand with them in their darkest hour and show them that humanity was different. As the days passed, the UEC forces continued to help the Zorvans rebuild. The remaining Zorvan cities were in ruins, but their warriors had begun to organize, preparing for the next wave of attacks. The Zorvans, though weary, were not ready to give up. They had fought for centuries, and they would fight until the last of them fell. But General Dirac's words echoed in Kincaid's mind. "If you truly wish to help, you must fight with us." Only then will we trust you. The UEC had already proven themselves in battle, but now it was time to prove themselves in the eyes of the Zorvans. They needed to show that they were not just allies in a single fight, but partners who would stand by the Zorvans through thick and thin. One evening, as the sun set over the ruined landscape, Kincaid called a meeting with General Dirac and his top officers. They sat around a table in the makeshift command center, their faces grim and determined. "We need to do more than just defend the planet," Kincaid said, her voice steady. "The Murtoki won't stop. We need to strike back, show them that the Zorvans aren't alone anymore. We need to go on the offensive." Dirac looked at her, his dark eyes narrowing. "Offensive? You want to attack them on their own turf?" "I do," Kincaid said. "We have the firepower and we've got the manpower. But more than that, we have the will to fight. If we wait for the Murtoki to come to us, we'll be fighting a losing battle. We need to take the fight to them." Dirac was silent for a long moment. The idea of attacking the Murtoki on their own ground was dangerous, but he knew that Kincaid was right. The Murtoki had already shown their ruthless intent, and they would not stop until the Zorvans were gone. If they were to have any hope of survival, they needed to hit back, hard. "We've fought for years, but we've always been on the defensive," Dirac said finally. "Perhaps it is time for us to take the fight to the enemy, but we'll need your help. This is not a war that the Zorvans can win alone. If you're serious about this, we'll stand with you." Kincaid nodded, grateful for Dirac's support. "We'll stand with you. Together, we can do this." The next few days were spent preparing for the offensive. The UEC forces worked alongside the Zorvans, gathering supplies, weapons, and fighters for the assault. It was clear that this would be their most dangerous mission yet. The Murtoki would not expect an attack, and they would have to strike fast and hard to catch them off guard. As the mission came together, Admiral Kincaid stood with her officers on the bridge of the Resolute looking out at the stars. The Zorvans had given them a chance to prove themselves, and she was determined to show them that humanity was not just a species of survivors, but a species that could stand tall, even in the face of overwhelming odds. "Admiral," Commander Lung said, breaking Kincaid's thoughts, "the fleet is ready. We can launch whenever you give the word." Kincaid nodded. "Let's make sure the Murtoki know we're coming." The operation was set in motion. The UEC fleet, joined by Zorvan warships, moved into position, preparing to make the jump into Murtoki territory. The plan was simple: hit them hard, destroy their key military installations, and make a strong statement that the Zorvans were not alone. The fleet moved through space, cloaked in silence. The Murtoki had no idea that the humans and Zorvans were coming. The element of surprise would be their greatest advantage. The Zorvans, with their advanced technology and warrior spirit, had been preparing for this day for years. Now, they would have their chance to show the galaxy that they were not a species to be forgotten. As they entered Murtoki space, the tension was palpable. Kincaid could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. This was not just about defeating the Murtoki. It was about sending a message to the galaxy. The Zorvans would not fall. Humanity would stand by their side. "Admiral, we're approaching the target," Leung said, his voice tight with anticipation. "Begin the attack," Kincaid ordered. The UEC and Zorvan fleets launched their assault. Fighters swarmed into Murtoki space, engaging enemy ships in a blistering exchange of fire. The Murtoki were caught off guard, their defensive lines quickly overwhelmed by the speed and ferocity of the attack. Kincaid watched the battle unfold, her heart pounding. This was a fight for survival, not just for the Zorvans, but for humanity's place in the galaxy. The stakes had never been higher. In the midst of the chaos, Zorvan warriors led the charge, taking down Murtoki warships with their advanced weaponry. The UEC ships, though smaller and less heavily armed, proved to be nimble and effective, striking with precision and overwhelming force. The battle raged on for hours, but slowly, the tide began to turn. The Murtoki forces, once confident in their superiority, were beginning to fall back. The joint forces of humanity and the Zorvans were proving too much for them to handle. As the final Murtoki ship exploded in a burst of flames, Admiral Kincaid breathed a sigh of relief. They had done it. The first step in their long fight was complete. The Zorvans had stood with humanity, and together they had sent a message to the galaxy. The Zorvans were not to be forgotten, and humanity was not just a species of survivors. They were warriors in their own right. As the fleet returned to Zorva, General Dirac stood beside K4O. The victory against the Murtoki had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For the first time in years, the Zorvans and humans had fought side by side and achieved something remarkable. The Murtoki, once considered an unstoppable force, had been driven back. But despite this success, the battle was far from over. Admiral Kincaid stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring out at the stars. The UEC fleet had returned to Zorva, victorious but bruised. The Murtoki had been pushed back, but they were still a dangerous force. And now the true cost of humanity's intervention was beginning to unfold. The galaxy was watching, and they did not approve of what the UEC had done. Kincaid knew that the decision to help the Zorvans had already angered some of the galaxy's most powerful factions. The Erythians, the galaxy's largest peacekeeping force, had made their disapproval clear. The Murtoki, though beaten for now, would certainly return for revenge. And the other neutral factions, who had never wanted to intervene in the Zorvan crisis, were beginning to take sides. But there was no going back now. Humanity had chosen to fight for the Zorvans, and they would see it through, no matter the consequences. "We've made a powerful statement," Kincaid said quietly to Commander Long, who stood beside her. "The galaxy knows we're not backing down." Long nodded. "But we've also made some enemies, the Erythians especially. They're already calling for a council meeting to discuss the human interference in Zorvan affairs." "We'll deal with that when the time comes," Kincaid replied. "Right now our focus is on the Zorvans. They need us. We can't afford to let them fall back into the hands of the Murtoki." At that moment, the communication officer on the bridge interrupted. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Arythian Peace Council." Kincaid sighed, but she was prepared. She nodded toward the officer. "Put it through." The holographic image of an Erythian diplomat appeared before her. He was a tall, regal figure with shimmering silver skin and piercing blue eyes. His voice was calm but firm. "Admiral Kincaid," the Erythian began, "your actions have not gone unnoticed. The galaxy watched as you intervened in the affairs of the Zorvans. You have broken several interstellar protocols, and your actions are now considered a direct challenge to galactic peace." Kincaid stood tall, her expression unwavering. "We did what was right. The Zorvans were dying, and we couldn't just watch them perish. We fought alongside them and will continue to do so until they can stand on their own again." The Erythian diplomat's eyes narrowed. "You misunderstand, Admiral. Your actions have upset the delicate balance of power in the galaxy. The Murtoki will retaliate, and their fury will be directed not just at the Zorvans, but at anyone who stands with them. And we stand with them," Kincaid interrupted. "We've made our choice. Humanity will not stand by while another species is destroyed. If that means facing the consequences, so be it." The Erythian diplomat hesitated, clearly taken aback by Kincaid's determination. "Very well," he said slowly. "But understand this, Admiral. You will not have the support of the Peace Council nor the Erythian fleet. If the Murtoki return, with greater force you will be left to fight alone." "We're used to fighting alone," Kincaid replied, her voice hardening, "and we'll win this fight." With that, the transmission ended, leaving a tense silence on the bridge. The crew could feel the weight of the situation. The galaxy had made it clear that humanity's involvement in the Zorvan crisis was not welcomed. The UEC had just stepped into a larger war, and the outcome was uncertain. But Kincaid knew one thing for sure. They had made the right choice, and they would see it through. As the days passed, the UEC fleet remained on high alert. The Erythians had closed their borders, refusing to assist humanity in any way. The Murtoki, though temporarily driven back, were regrouping, preparing for another assault. But the Zorvans were not without their own resources. They had a long history of warfare and survival, and with humanity's help, they had begun to rebuild their strength. On the ground, General Dirac and the Zorvan resistance continued to organize. The Zorvans, once a proud and powerful race, were slowly starting to trust humanity. There was still a lot of work to be done, but the bond between the two species was growing stronger with each passing day. Dirac had even begun to rely on Kincaid's leadership in strategic matters, a gesture of respect that Kincaid did not take lightly. "We'll need to fortify our defenses," Dirac said one evening, as he and Kincaid stood overlooking the Zorvan capital. "The Mertoki will return and we must be ready." Kincaid nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We'll make sure they know we're ready for them. This time we'll take the fight to their homeworld." The decision to go on the offensive had been difficult, but Kincaid knew it was the only way. If they were to prevent the Mertoki from destroying the Zorvans once and for all, they had to hit them where it hurt. It was a risky plan, but it was the only plan that had a chance of success. As the UEC fleet and Zorvan warriors prepared for the next stage of the war, the galaxy continued to watch with growing tension. The Erythians had warned that humanity's actions would have consequences, and many factions were waiting to see how the situation would unfold. But for Kincaid and her crew, there was no turning back. They had made their choice, and they would see it through to the end. The war for the Zorvan survival had become a war for humanity's place in the galaxy, and as the final preparations for the offensive began, Admiral Kincaid knew that the stakes had never been higher. The galaxy was watching, but humanity was ready to make its mark. The question now was whether they would be able to defend the Zorvans, or if the galaxy's apathy would swallow them all. This part delves into the diplomatic and political fallout from humanity's intervention in the Zorvan crisis. It sets up the increasing tensions with the galaxy's other factions and builds toward the next phase of the conflict, raising the stakes for humanity's involvement. The UEC fleet had gathered, ready for the final push. The Zorvans, now fully committed to their alliance with humanity, had reinforced their defenses, their warriors prepared to fight side by side with the humans. The stakes had never been higher. The Mertoshi were regrouping and would soon launch their most devastating assault yet. The galaxy watched, but no one was prepared to step in to help. Admiral Sarah Kincaid stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring out into the black expanse of space. The stars twinkled like distant promises, but the weight of the mission ahead hung heavily in the air. The Erythians had cut off any chance of help, their neutral stance on the matter only serving to fuel the distrust between the factions of the galaxy. But Kincaid didn't care about the politics anymore. This wasn't about power or alliances, it was about survival. "Admiral," Commander Leung said, his voice tight with anticipation. "We're ready to move. The fleet is at full readiness." Kincaid nodded. "Good. This ends today. No more waiting." It was time to confront the Mertoki on their turf. The Mertoki were known for their ruthlessness. Their ships were massive, their firepower devastating. They had been the ones to push the Zorvans to the brink of extinction. They were coming, not just to defeat the Zorvans, but to erase them from the galaxy entirely. This was not just about stopping them. It was about ensuring that no one else would ever face the same fate. "We've trained for this," Kincaid said, turning to face her officers. "We fight not just for the Zorvans, but for everyone who's ever been left behind in this galaxy. For every species that's ever been ignored, every race that's been oppressed." She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the faces of her crew. There was no fear in their eyes, only determination. These were the same men and women who had fought against insurmountable odds, who had stood firm when the galaxy had told them to stay silent. Now they had a chance to show the galaxy that humanity was more than just a survivor. They were a force to be reckoned with. "Let's give them a reason to remember us," Kincaid finished. The fleet moved into position, silently moving through space. The Mertoki had no idea what was coming. The UEC fleet, now reinforced with Zorvan warships, was ready to strike. They would take the fight directly to the Mertoki's homeworld, hitting their most critical military installations before they could mount a proper defense. The first wave of fighters surged forward, diving through space in precise formations. The Mertoki's defenses were formidable. But the humans and Zorvans had worked together to develop new tactics that would catch them off guard. The element of surprise was on their side. Admiral Kincaid's voice crackled through the comms, giving orders with cold precision. Target the Mirtoki flagship. All forces, focus on that ship first. We need to take down their command structure. The UEC fighters moved in, launching salvo after salvo of energy blasts. The Mirtoki flagship, a massive behemoth of a ship, was heavily armored, but it was also slow. The UEC fighters darted around it, avoiding its heavy fire as they targeted its weak points. Zorvan warships added their firepower, weakening the Mirtoki defenses. After what felt like an eternity, the Mirtoki flagship erupted in a massive explosion. A cheer rang out across the fleet, but Kincaid didn't allow herself to feel relief. The battle had only just begun. The Mirtoki retaliated swiftly. Dozens of smaller ships dropped out of hyperspace surrounding the UEC fleet. The space around Zorva became a battlefield, filled with flashing lights and the roar of weapons fire. The UEC fleet held their ground, working in perfect synchronization with the Zorvans. It was a sight that had never been seen before in the galaxy. Two species, once isolated and divided, now working as one unstoppable force. On the ground, General Dirac and his warriors fought with unmatched ferocity. The Mirtoki, though technologically advanced, were no match for the Zorvan warriors who had fought for generations. Their heavy armor clashed with the swift and powerful strikes of the Zorvans. Dirac, leading his men, fought like a force of nature. His once doubtful eyes now shone with confidence. Humanity had shown them that they could still fight for a future, and now they were returning that trust tenfold. Hours passed as the battle raged on, the forces of both sides relentless. The Mirtoki were finally starting to retreat, their ships burning and breaking apart under the combined assault of the UEC and Zorvans. But even as they retreated, they left behind a message. The war was not yet over, and the Mirtoki would be back. Yet, in that moment, something incredible happened. The UEC fleet had successfully destroyed key Mirtoki installations, crippled their command structure, and made a statement. The Mirtoki forces, for the first time in centuries, were forced to acknowledge defeat. The galaxy's most feared race had been brought to its knees, and it was humanity and the Zorvans who had made it happen. The aftermath was filled with the usual chaos of a battle won. Ships were damaged, casualties mounted, and the immediate task of recovery began. But there was something else in the air, a sense of change, of new alliances being forged. The Zorvans had fought with humanity, and together they had achieved the impossible. They had won a battle that no one else thought was winnable. Admiral Kincaid stood on the bridge of the Resolute, gazing out at the stars once more. The galaxy was watching, and humanity had proven that they were a force to be reckoned with. The days of staying in the shadows were over. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they could no longer be ignored. They were a new power, one that could be trusted, one that could be relied upon. Kincaid knew that there would be more battles to come. The Mirtoki would not give up easily, and other factions would test humanity's resolve. But for the first time in a long while, Kincaid felt hope. The Zorvans had survived, and humanity had shown the galaxy what they were truly capable. "So we did it," Leung said softly, standing beside her. Kincaid nodded, but her mind was already moving forward. "This is just the beginning. We've earned their trust, but we need to continue proving ourselves. The galaxy won't forget what we've done, but we must make sure they know we're not done yet." And as she stood there, watching the stars, Admiral Kincaid knew that humanity had found its place in the galaxy. They had answered a call for help, not because they had to, but because it was the right thing to do. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity chose to intervene, and neither would the Zorvans. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. This concluding part of the story celebrates humanity's victory, highlights their new position in the galaxy, and sets the stage for future challenges, leaving a lasting legacy of courage, trust, and strength. Kumini.